So why, in short, are we in such a mess? Why are we in crisis? The answers are basically threefold. The reasons are threefold. First, in the last 5 years, we've seen new or recurrent conflicts erupting around the world. I'm talking about situations in Burundi, in Ukraine, South Sudan, Nigeria, well, a certain part of Nigeria, Yemen, etc. So new people are getting displaced on a regular basis. The second reason is that old conflicts are not going away. Syria, for example, is the largest refugee-producing country in the world today. It's entering its 6th year of conflict, and basically about half of the pre-war population has been uprooted so far. In other refugee-hosting countries like refugee-producing countries like Somalia and Afghanistan, they are entering their 3rd and 4th decade of conflict. That's a long time to be at war. And if you're watching the TV these days, you'll see that every day incidents of senseless violence are still happening in places like this. So where do these refugees go? There's a common misconception that they're all flocking to the rich countries, they're all flocking to the US, to Europe, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The fact is that around 90%, 9 out of every 10 refugees in the world, are hosted in either poor or developing countries. Countries like Turkey, which is the largest hosting country, like Lebanon, countries like Pakistan, Iran, Ethiopia. And the sad thing is that appeals for humanitarian assistance to support these host countries go largely unheeded, and this places increasing pressure on the host communities. Meanwhile, in some regions that were unfamiliar with mass arrivals in the past, in the last year, they're starting to see some arrivals coming. Not at the scale seen in the developing world, but some. For example, in the second half of last year, I think most of us would have seen refugees and migrants crossing the Mediterranean, trying to reach Europe. At the same time, it probably garnered less attention, but is still a serious problem, is the fact that rising violence in Central America is driving thousands of men, women, and children to try and seek asylum in the United States and Mexico. The third reason there are so many displaced people today is that we simply cannot find enough solutions quickly enough. Traditionally, UNHCR works with governments in to try and find solutions for refugees in 3 main ways. First, where the situation in a refugee's home country has improved significantly, we help the refugees to return home in safety and dignity. Secondly, for those in countries where there is some political will, we work with governments to try and integrate some of these refugees in their host country. And thirdly, for refugees, especially the most vulnerable ones, who cannot be locally integrated and cannot return home for the time being, we submit their cases to resettlement countries to be considered for resettlement. But at the end of the day, it's those resettlement countries like the US, like Australia, Japan, Korea, that decide whether or not to accept these refugees. The problem is that with persistent conflict, uprooting 24 people every minute, it's impossible to find enough solutions quickly enough. I think what's really worrying is not just that displacement levels are rising, it's also that the asylum space that we have is shrinking. In the last year, we've seen people and boats being pushed back. We've seen fences being built. We've seen shots being fired and tear gassing happening at borders. Basically, asylum policies are getting more and more restrictive. Xenophobia is increasing. Populism is also rising. People talk about these threats of mass migration, but they don't seem to realize that in today's global we can't stop people from moving. You can't stop free movement. We can only try and manage these flows in the most humane and orderly way that we can. And this is where I'd like to raise an issue about, make a point about terminology. UNHCR has started a campaign called Word Choice Matters. There's been a lot of confusion between refugees and migrants. These words are usually used quite interchangeably in the media or in public discourse. The problem is that there is a crucial difference, and it's important to make that difference. As you know, refugees escape from conflict and persecution. The situation in their country is often so bad, forced to another country to seek safety. And until the situation, the persecution and the war ends in their country, it's too difficult for them to go back, and they will continue to need sanctuary elsewhere in another country. On the other hand, migrants tend to choose to move not because of a direct threat of persecution or death. Instead, some are driven by poverty or underdevelopment to leave home and try to find work elsewhere. If they choose to return home, migrants will still continue to receive the protection of their government. Now, I'm not saying that refugees have rights and migrants don't, but it's really important to distinguish between the different sets of rights that they have based on their status. We need to treat everybody with dignity and respect, that's for sure. But blurring the lines between refugees and migrants has serious repercussions. It detracts from the specific legal protection that refugees need, and by this I mean protection from being punished for crossing an international illegally, trying to seek safety. I also mean protection from being sent back to a place where their lives could be in danger. So we have to remember that seeking asylum is not a crime. It's a universal human right. Conflating refugees and migrants can result in flawed policies, and we've seen that in parts of the world. It can also undermine public support for refugees and the very institution of asylum. It took a 3-year-old boy to make the world sit up and pay attention. In September last year, Syrian refugee Aylan Kurdi left Turkey with his family and tried to sail to Greece. As you know, he didn't make it. The image of his body washed up on a Turkish beach moved millions of people, including my colleague who painted this picture. Aylan's death was a grim reminder of the tragedies that unfold as people try to reach the shores of Europe. Meanwhile, halfway across the world in the Bay of Bengal, another tragedy unfolded last summer. Probably received a lot less media attention, but is no less tragic. A 3-year-old girl from Myanmar's Rakhine State, her name is Shahira Bibi, she left on a boat with her mother and her sister in the hope of reaching some relatives in Malaysia. For months, they drifted in the Bay of Bengal on this boat until the smugglers who were supposed to take them to their destination abandoned them. So what happened was this boat was stranded, and for quite some time it was drifting, and it was turned away by a number of countries that refused to let them land. As the supplies on board, the food and water, ran low, there was a fight on board, and at least a dozen people were killed. Some say up to 100, but we can't verify that. Eventually, this boat was rescued by some Indonesian fishermen, but by then it was too late. Shahira Bibi had contracted tetanus on board, and 3 days after the rescue, she died from her sickness. Now, I can't help but think if she and her family were allowed to disembark sooner and to get help sooner, she might have survived. So for every victim that we mourn, there are also survivors that we need to celebrate. In my 14 years with the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, I've met many refugees who have beaten the odds. They are proof that given just half a chance, they can get back on their feet and also help others along the way. When I was working in Pakistan, I met many Afghan refugees, but one boy left the deepest impression. His name is Zaman. He was around 15 years old when I met him, a very soft-spoken teenager from Parwan province in Afghanistan. Basically, he told me that he started working when he was about 8. He was helping out at a fast food stall in Islamabad. Zaman spoke Dari, some Urdu, but he was determined to learn English because he felt that it would be good for his future. So every day, when it wasn't so busy at work, when there weren't that many customers, he would sit down and try to memorize one new word a day. And he kept at it for years until he was able to read and speak English fluently. The last time I met him a few years ago, he had been accepted for a scholarship from a Pakistani foundation, and he was looking forward to getting some higher education. I'm quite confident that with his thirst for learning, this boy will go very far in life. In Thailand, where I'm based now, I met this man. His name is Nader. He is a Palestinian refugee. His father was a refugee, and Nader himself was born in Syria's Yarmouk camp. Despite a very difficult childhood, he grew up to become a very successful saxophone player. In 2011, the war in Syria started. Nader's family was forced to flee their home. For 2 years, they tried to move from one relative's house to another, trying to survive. But one day, they were in a taxi when they came under direct sniper fire. Luckily, nobody was hurt. But for them, that was the moment they knew it was too dangerous to stay in Damascus. They sought asylum in Thailand, where Nader tried to work to play the saxophone in as many restaurants as he could. He was underpaid and always struggling to find odd jobs to supplement the income. Whenever I met him, he looked very tired from the late hours and just struggling to make ends meet. But I think what really kept him up at night was the fact that his children were missing school. For every month, every year they were spending in exile in Thailand, they couldn't attend regular school, and they were clearly missing out. Instead of attending school, they stayed home every day, and they had very few friends. This was clearly not healthy. But through thick and thin, the family stuck together. They were unable to afford meat or vegetables very often, but they used to joke about their diverse diet of bread and eggs and bread, and they would cook them in every way imaginable to try and make it different. Eventually, in September last year, they were resettled to the Netherlands, and I sincerely hope that Nader's children will be the last generation of refugees in that family. I've always been struck by the resilience of refugees. These people have been dealt the worst hand, but still they managed to come up on top. If I were in their shoes, facing the same dangers and the same uncertainties, I don't know if I could find the same courage to cope. I am somebody who freaks out when I lose my phone, and it happened this morning. David was there. He said I looked very composed, but I was having a silent heart attack. Luckily, somebody at the hotel found it after a few hours. But for somebody who freaks out at just losing a phone, I cannot imagine losing my loved ones or losing my home or being forced to leave everything behind. Another thing about refugees is that they're very adaptable. I know a family of Vietnamese refugees. Before the war, they were selling textiles in Ho Chi Minh City in the south. When the trouble started, they closed shop and they survived by making fermented yam. Somehow, through this very small business, they scraped together enough money to build a boat for themselves. And they ended up sailing to Malaysia with just a few dollars in their pocket. Eventually, this family was resettled to Canada. They were clearly a very innovative and enterprising family. Mr. Lien started a bakery in Toronto, which grew into a whole chain of bakeries. His younger son, Chris, went to law school and eventually took over the family business. His elder son, Alex, studied business and later came back to Vietnam to invest in his home country. So no matter where they are, refugees can really be an asset. My NGO friends in Europe, for example, are always amazed at how highly educated and highly skilled Syrian refugees there are. Refugees have very little, but they're always ready to give. Their attitude and skills have done much to enrich the communities around them. Having said that, these refugees would not have survived without the support of their hosts. There are many heroes in refugee-receiving countries and communities, and here I'd just like to give a shout out to a few. As I mentioned earlier, in May last year, there was a standoff in the Bay of Bengal, the same one that eventually killed Shahira Bibi. Thousands of Rohingya and Bangladeshis were basically abandoned by smugglers on boats, and they were refused entry by several countries. So as navies and coast guards looked away, Indonesian fishermen from Aceh province stepped in, and they rescued more than 1,800 people from these boats. When he was asked why they did it, one of the fishermen said very matter-of-factly, "Oh, these people were in need. I had a moral obligation to help." He didn't even question it. And then there's the, sorry, I should have flicked to the boats. Then there's the Greek mayor, who decided to turn a holiday resort into a refugee shelter. Here you see him interacting with some of the refugees he's taken in. More than 300 refugees, many of them women, children, the elderly, are very grateful to have a roof over their heads as they contemplate their next steps. Meanwhile, in upstate New York, Utica, I hope I pronounced it right, Utica is known as the town that loves refugees. 1 in 4 residents in Utica is a refugee, and not just for humanitarian reasons. The hard work, the strong work ethics, and the skills of these refugees have helped the local economy there to rebound after years of decline. In Africa, I saw somebody with a Zambian cap earlier. Zambia has been a regional leader, hosting tens of thousands of refugees in recent decades. These refugees are generally from Angola, from Burundi, from Congo, Rwanda, Somalia. And in a welcome move recently, the Zambian government announced that it would integrate thousands of these refugees, giving them a home and a permanent residency in Zambia. Now, in 3 days, the Rio Olympics will open in Brazil. First ever refugee team. 10 runners, swimmers, and judo experts from countries like Syria, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo will compete. This initiative sends a strong message of support for refugees worldwide. It's a tribute to the perseverance and the courage of refugees who have overcome adversity and fought to build a better future for themselves and their families. UNHCR hopes that you will join us in cheering them on when the Olympics start. I know that I'll be glued to my TV for 3 weeks. So while the overall situation looks rather bleak on the refugee front, we do find small victories everywhere we look. If we can just build on some of this spirit and momentum of these individuals and these communities, there is hope that we can resolve some of these seemingly intractable problems. So, what can I offer? What solutions can I offer as a humble aid worker? I think the answers lie in political action, in humanitarian responses, and in humane policies. Quite simply, the only way to stop refugees is to stop wars. There's no other way about it. UNHCR is a humanitarian and non-political organization, so I probably couldn't get into great detail about what it takes to stop a war, but it's clear that there has to be political will to pursue peace efforts in some of the world's hotspots. We also need, at the same time, we need to promote development as a whole so that people can stay where they are in a safe and stable way. On the one hand, it's important to treat the symptoms and consequences of war. And I'm glad some of my fellow speakers will touch on some of these issues later. But on the other hand, unless we address the root causes of displacement, people will continue to feel the need to flee. I've met many refugees, and many of them say that they just want to go home. When I ask them, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years, they say, I want to be home. But the conditions are not yet safe, they say. In this rather bleak landscape, there is some cause for hope. In this region, for example, in Myanmar, where there is a new government, and peace talks could be laying the foundation for some of the Myanmar refugees in Thailand's camps to eventually return home. There's this grandmother in northern Thailand. Her name is Ba May. I've completely failed at my slides, sorry. Timing's off. But Ba May, interestingly, we think a lot of people want resettlement, but this lady here has said no to resettlement to the US, even though most of her family has gone to the US. I asked her why. She said, well, my husband, who died some years ago, is buried here, and this is closer to home in Myanmar. When they first fled, the family thought, in a few weeks, in a few months, we'll be back in Myanmar. But 20 years later, they're still in exile. They're still in a camp in Thailand. At the age of 78, Ba May doesn't think she'll see her homeland again. She doesn't think she'll live that long. But she's hopeful that her grandchildren can eventually go home. While it's important to pursue solutions like voluntary return, until the situation in countries of origin improve enough to promote safe and sustainable return, UNHCR is urging countries to keep their doors open to people who need international protection. Closing borders or back doesn't stop people from fleeing. It endangers lives, and it forces people to turn to smugglers and to take greater risks to reach safety. Such actions could also strain relations with neighboring countries. Going back to the Bay of Bengal situation last year, although the boat passengers were eventually allowed to land in some of the surrounding countries, there's no guarantee that this so-called maritime ping pong will not happen again. In the aftermath of last year's boat crisis in this region, governments pledged to improve coordination on rescue at sea, letting people land in countries in a safe way. They agreed that there was an urgent need for humanitarian assistance, there was a need to screen people for specific needs, and to find solutions accordingly. Sadly, it's been a year since that happened, more than a year, and still, that regional task force has not been set up yet. In the face That's why it's really important for us to make sure that asylum systems are strong, that they're able to assess people's needs and find out who is a refugee and who isn't, who needs protection and who maybe can return home. Those recognized as refugees must get the protection they need. And those who are found not to be refugees should be given the option of returning home, where they will continue to receive state protection. Given this global crisis, we must focus on sharing, not shifting responsibility. It's not sustainable for poor countries to host millions of refugees for decades. It's not fair. But our funding appeals for the Afghan situation, the Somali, the Syrian refugee situations have been chronically underfunded. The international community needs to do more in terms of providing humanitarian assistance and technical assistance, especially in frontline states. Resettlement is another way to ease the pressure on major host countries and to give refugees a fresh start elsewhere. There's no question that refugees have a lot to contribute. We should invest in them by making sure that they can access basic services and basic rights. Refugee children should be able to go to school, and adults should be able to work legally. People always complain, refugees, they're a burden. But if they were allowed to work legally, they could support themselves and their families. They wouldn't be a burden. These are difficult times, and we need innovative solutions. Next month in Bangkok, UNHCR will co-organize a regional meeting on labor mobility options for refugees. The idea there is to explore with the public and private sector how best to use the skills of refugees who are already in the country to support business. Many countries are already importing labor, so we're trying to see if somehow they could use the refugees who are already in country to provide the same skills and the same labor. At the same time, more legal pathways are needed so that people don't have to turn to smugglers and traffickers. These pathways include programs for refugee resettlement, humanitarian admissions, private sponsorships, family reunions, study visas and scholarships, and of course, labor migration options. But these solutions will only work if they are part of a comprehensive approach that involves the countries of origin, of asylum, and the international community. The spirit of solidarity and burden sharing must prevail if we are to succeed. We can't afford to fail. Happily, we can look to the past for some lessons, right here in our host country. You probably know political conflict and turmoil in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos forced more than 3 million people to flee their homes. Some of them escaped on foot to neighboring countries like Thailand, where you see these refugees in the famous Khao I Dang camp. And some of them, others took to the sea in rickety boats, hoping to reach safety elsewhere in Southeast Asia. Along the way, some of these boat people died from hunger and dehydration as they drifted aimlessly. They got on these boats not knowing where they were going. Others were pushed back to sea to an uncertain fate. Many actually ran into ruthless pirates. They were attacked, abducted, raped, and killed. So in the face of such widespread suffering, the international community rallied together and responded decisively. Basically, the countries in this region agreed to keep their borders open and to host these refugees temporarily. Countries in the West, like the US, Canada, Australia, and France, for example, agreed to accept some of these refugees for resettlement. But the outflow continued for more than 10 years, and it prompted some questions on how sustainable such an approach was. So in 1989, a new regional approach was adopted. It was called the Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the CPA for short. Basically, under this agreement, UNHCR conducted refugee status determination in the asylum countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. And those people who were recognized as refugees were resettled to the West. But those whose claims were rejected, who were found not to be refugees, were held to return home to their home countries without recrimination. UNHCR was able to monitor their return and to visit them afterwards to make sure they were okay. And to dissuade people from risking their lives at sea, Vietnam set up an orderly departure program that allowed people in the country, in Vietnam, to reunite with family members who had been resettled in the West. The CPA has been hailed as a model of regional responsibility, international burden sharing. It was probably one of the first times a country of origin, in this case Vietnam, became a key player in helping to resolve a major refugee crisis. But clearly, this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. The spirit of the CPA was admirable, but its practices must be adapted to suit today's realities. For example, it's no longer tenable to expect Western countries to resettle refugees from Asia en masse in large numbers. There are competing demands elsewhere, competing needs, so this can no longer keep going. And in the meantime, countries that were hosting refugees during the Indo-Chinese crisis have since become even middle, upper income countries. They can afford to do more for refugees. They can do so by granting access to basic services like healthcare and education. They can also, again, allow refugees to work access to the labor market until longer-term solutions are found. So UNHCR has been working and trying to reconcile these opportunities and these challenges at the same time. It's clear we can't do it alone. We need the help of governments, of businesses, of civil society, and people like you to make it happen. Specifically, there are a number of ways you can help. Here at UNHCR, we launched a campaign around World Refugee Day in June called With Refugees. We're asking you, everyone, to sign an online petition urging governments around the world to show solidarity and find solutions for refugees. Specifically, we're asking them to make sure that every refugee child has an education, that every refugee family has a safe place to live, that every refugee can work or learn skills that allows them to contribute in a positive way to their community. This petition will be presented to the UN General Assembly in mid-September. We hope that it will be the biggest ever petition in support of refugees. So on behalf of UNHCR and displaced people around the world, I'm urging you to log on to our website, unhcr.org, and to sign this petition. By doing so, you stand together with refugees at this crucial time. You can also become a UNHCR donor to fund our work for refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced, and stateless people. There are also lots of other NGOs working with refugees that need your support. In short, we welcome all efforts to spread the word and encourage you to check out our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, etc. In your own communities, you can volunteer to help, and you can also help to advocate for refugee rights. You can join the campaign against xenophobia by promoting understanding, tolerance, and compassion. Be the voice of reason. Many people around the world have opened up their homes and their hearts to refugees. Let's try and keep the spirit of hospitality and generosity alive. On a personal note, I'm quite encouraged to see some shifts in attitudes in my own country, Singapore. It's a small country that has a very limited history with refugees. It's currently hosting no refugees, and it had a limited role during the Indo-Chinese crisis. And until recently, my sense, and the Singaporeans in this crowd can correct me, was that few Singaporeans knew or cared much about the refugee situation around the world. Thankfully, that awareness has grown, I think, thanks to the media coverage around the Bay of Bengal boat crisis last year, and also with the establishment of a volunteer group that's advocating for refugees. This year, this group held a week-long awareness campaign during World Refugee Day in June. So in the space of a few months, a year, Singapore has gone from zero awareness of refugees to generating some buzz, not just among the public, but also in Parliament. So if regular folks can achieve this, I hope that the brilliant minds gathered here can make a bigger dent and help to break down the walls that are rising up around us. You can lobby your leaders to find equitable ways to share responsibilities for refugees. They could fund humanitarian assistance. They could provide temporary protection in their country. They could resettle refugees from elsewhere. Or they could support peace efforts in some of these conflict-affected countries. As the world's future leaders, you're also in the unique position to influence policies and decisions that can decisively break the vicious cycle of war and displacement. To quote my favorite superhero, with great power comes great responsibility. I hope you use it well. Now, I'm happy to take questions afterwards, and I think Amanda will help to moderate. But I'd also like to hear about your experiences with refugees or as refugees. I don't know if anyone in this group has a refugee background. We need fresh ideas and perspectives. We need individuals, communities, and countries to work together to try and resolve this challenge. It's not too late to try and change things, but we do need to act now. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mayur Mukadi, and I am representing India because I am Indian, and as well as Canada because I came from Canada. So I just want to ask, have this UNHCR ever analyzed the benefits that refugees are getting into the host organizations or host countries? Like in terms of, we always see refugees as having some problem because of migration and everything, but what benefits they have when they are migrating? Have you ever like seen that?
I'm not quite sure what you're getting at. Can you clarify? Benefits?
Like we always see refugees as some kind of negative connotation, like refugees have bad life and everything, which is obvious, quite obvious, but is there any benefits that you have seen because they are migrating and they are moving to some other place?
Well, okay. I think as I mentioned earlier, what's different between a migrant and a refugee is forced to flee. They don't have a choice. So they're forced to flee for their lives, where migrants sometimes can choose. Although, you know, if you're choosing between poverty and underdevelopment, then I'm not questioning why people move at all.
I haven't framed my question well. Like,
Okay.
I want to ask if you have ever noticed, like in interviews or maybe informally talking to them, that refugees are saying that when they have migrated to some other place, then they felt that that place is pretty much better than what they were having previously.
I think when you say better, often better means they have a chance to live. It means that, you know, they're not they're not seeing daily shooting, they're not facing daily bombings. So definitely better in the country of asylum in that sense. But often, I can't generalize, but many refugees I talk to do want to go home eventually. The problem is that there isn't peace yet in their home, and that's what I think we need to do more to promote peace in their country so that they can do what they want, which is to return home.
Okay, actually this was the question with regards to climate change, because I was looking into climate change part, like when the refugees are migrating because of the disasters that is happening as a result of climate change. So how those refugees are getting involved in the new place. Like if I just talk about Canada, it's known for its diversity, but as well as it is also known right now for accepting the refugees. So I think it's good for both the host country as well as the refugees. So I was just thinking about that scenario and answer.
Yes, thanks for pointing out that refugees have a lot to contribute to their host country, including in Canada. Like these friends of mine from Vietnam, there's no question about that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Emma Groombridge and I'm from New Zealand. I volunteer with the Red Cross in Wellington, New Zealand, resettling refugees. And I was just wondering what you think, what sort of programs are the best for resettlement, what do they include, and how can we improve our resettlement programs so that refugees are best integrated into our communities?
Well, I think New Zealand has done a pretty good job of accepting refugees on resettlement. Of course, we would always prefer if you took in more. But in terms of integrating them, I think your country's done a pretty good job. And we actually use these examples of sort of best practices in other areas. UNHCR doesn't get too directly involved once refugees are resettled in a new country. But there's a whole network of NGOs working with government authorities to, I think, provide those services, to, I guess, provide language training, cultural orientation, to make sure that people are comfortable, people have the skills and the language to stand on their own 2 feet. So I think those in New Zealand, those programs are very much in place. And thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Hussein and I'm originally from Afghanistan. Recently I'm studying in Malaysia. And yeah, I've seen a lot of the refugees, especially from my countrymen in Malaysia. The question that I have is like, I've talked to many of them, even I went with some of them to the UNHCR office in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. The condition for refugees in Kuala Lumpur is, I think, a lot different from other places. There is a point that after they do register under the UNHCR, they don't get they don't get any kind of support, and the only answer that they get is like, after they register, it's like, you go and after that we will call you back. So now my question is like, how long the procedure of the UNHCR took to give them an answer. Why I'm saying this? Because I've even seen the people, they have been waiting for 3 years, specifically 3 years, to get the first response, to get at least that where they came from and why they came. They didn't have any kind of interview. And the most important problem that they have at the moment, for those that I've talked to, it is that they don't have any response from the UNHCR in Malaysia specifically.
I think the situation in Malaysia is quite typical of the situation in Southeast Asia, where a big gap is that governments in Southeast Asia, many of them, there's a few exceptions like the Philippines and Cambodia, but most countries in this region have not signed the 1951 Refugee Convention. They don't have national asylum laws or refugee laws. So in the absence of that, UNHCR steps in to do what a government usually should do. Asylum is mainly a government responsibility, but if the system isn't there, we step in to help temporarily. So there's no way we can have the resources of a national government, and that's what we keep telling governments, including in Malaysia. In terms of your question on the average wait, there isn't an average wait. Usually it tends to be on a first-come, first-served basis in order to be fair. If people are especially vulnerable, if you're getting unaccompanied children, if you have disabled or people with chronic medical problems, we tend to prioritize them for processing. And in terms of that question on assistance, unfortunately, our resources are limited. You've seen the global refugee crisis, so UNHCR, our resources are seriously stretched. We're constantly asking for more funding from donor countries. There's been mixed responses. But because of these scarce resources, it means that we have to prioritize assistance for the most vulnerable. So people who clearly cannot go out and work informally, people who need urgent medical care but can't get it. So we work very closely with NGOs. Malaysia has excellent NGOs that also help to support refugees.
A very, very last question, sorry for taking the time, is like, as a student, not only in Malaysia, in other countries, what do you suggest that the students can contribute for the refugees? Thanks.
Sign this petition, please. You have a month to do that. I mean, you come from a very interesting country, and I wonder if you're planning to go back and work when you're done.
Definitely, yes.
Okay. So there is your contribution there, helping to build peace and stability in your country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a question from Mike one, please.
My name is Olabode Ajibola, and I'm representing United States of America. My question is this. From your, Ms. Tan, from your experience as an advocate for refugees, so what are the problems that you have faced in the past, and what are the solutions that you provide, and how can we move forward from there?
Ooh, that's a lecture in itself. Broadly, I think aside from these record high numbers of displaced people that we're seeing, all these endless conflicts around the world, a big problem is just that attitudes are getting more and more negative towards refugees and asylum seekers. So there's a lot we can do to try and improve public attitudes. Don't just subscribe to the common view that refugees are a burden, refugees are criminals. We know for a fact that refugees can contribute a lot, and we've seen real-life example. So if you, in your community, could help to just reinforce that fact, then that would really help to change attitudes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Ms. Tan. My name is Clayton Sims. I'm representing the United States. Thank you for your time this afternoon. What do you believe is the greatest issue that we as a global people must tackle in reaching for world peace?
I said I was going to put the spotlight on you, not the other way around. World peace. Tolerance, understanding, dialogue. I'm just thinking, for example, of what's happening in Myanmar, where there's a glimmer of hope. I mean, after decades of fighting along the border areas of Myanmar, between the Myanmar troops and ethnic minorities, they're coming to the table, they're starting to talk. So I think that's always a good start. I'm hoping the same will happen with Syria. The peace talks hopefully will resume soon. I hope that they can finally make a breakthrough, because 6 years of conflict is really too long.
Thank you.
My name's Victoria. I'm from Wellington in New Zealand. In New Zealand, there's a bit of a debate at the moment because we're so far away from other countries that we're lucky enough to be able to pick a number of refugees, and at the moment it's 750, and only take that amount of refugees, whereas other countries will have other people, like Australia has people arriving by boat, but that doesn't really happen for New Zealand.
One boat tried to go.
So some people want us to take a lot more refugees, but other people say that we need to take a fewer number of refugees so that we can provide a very expansive resettlement program for them and have lots of opportunities for them. So there's a kind of trade-off between accepting lots or accepting a few and having a really good resettlement program. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that trade-off and which should be prioritized. Thank you.
Another difficult question.
Sorry.
It's really, like you say, it's a trade-off, it's a balance we have to find. These days, we're in desperate need of resettlement places. So quantity would be good, but again, like you mentioned, we don't want to compromise on the quality. But again, I think New Zealand has a well-established structure for integrating resettled refugees. So I hope that we can push the limits a little bit and try to take a few more.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now take the questions, sir.
My name is Frederick Chibuye, representing Zambia. I'm proud to be coming from Zambia because Zambia is known to be a beacon of peace in Africa for the last 50 years. We've never experienced any wars, and we are proud to keep a lot of refugees in Zambia. And a lot of them are integrated into our even school system. And we eat with the refugees in Zambia. They are colleagues and friends. But in your own opinion, do you think the donors, maybe the big guys, the rich guys, globally, who are aware that we've got such a crisis in the world regarding refugees, are they doing enough to cushion the budgets for different nations that are keeping these refugees through the United Nations? What is your opinion? Thank you.
Thanks. I get the sense, and this is my personal view, that there's been so many natural disasters, so many conflicts, so there's some donor fatigue going on. And given how politicized the asylum issue has become, countries are finding it harder and harder to work together. But clearly, there's a need for countries to work together to try and resolve this. And funding is a huge issue. Just from our UNHCR's very narrow perspective, the funding appeals that we launch with our partners and with governments are almost always underfunded. One of them, I think it was in South Sudan or Burundi, is only 11% funded. I mean, we can't even begin to treat the symptoms of conflict with no budget, and forget about trying to move the next step and trying to look at how to establish peace and all that. So there definitely needs to be more funding support from the big guys and the non-traditional guys. We're exploring new avenues of funding, looking at beyond the big 5, the big 10 donors, and trying to see how middle income, upper middle income countries can contribute to the cause as well.
Thank you so much, and may God richly bless you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sandra and I'm representing Mexico. And my question is, well, in Mexico we don't really talk that much about refugees as much as migrants. And my question is, how can you explain the process of resettlement? Like, how does it work?
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Resettlement is basically, we call it third country resettlement. So, okay, somebody flees conflict in country A, arrives in the neighboring country B, but for some reason cannot survive in country B. Maybe because he has a serious medical condition and country B cannot provide those services, or he can't possibly afford treatment in that country. So that's when UNHCR would identify this person as a vulnerable refugee. We would submit his or her case to a resettlement country, and then the resettlement country, be it the US, Australia, Sweden, etc., would consider, based on their own policies and criteria, whether or not they can accept this person. So if that third country, the US, Australia, etc., accepts the refugee, then that's considered resettlement, third country resettlement. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
My name's Wing, I'm from Hong Kong. My question mainly has two parts. The first part is sort of similar to what's asked before, because I remember from earlier on in the year when some of the refugees from the Syrian crisis, when they came to Europe, there were incidents in Germany where they were sort of accused of gang assault or rape or something like that. I was wondering if there were any schemes that could help the refugees on the road or when they first reach the border of Europe to actually educate them, to make them have a better image. And my second question is more about Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong, it's not sort of officially in the UNHCR's schemes or programs. I don't think it has signed the resolutions and conventions and any convention type of things. But in Hong Kong, there's also this phenomenon where many people come here and the government or maybe even people living in Hong Kong would think that, oh, they're just trying to claim benefits, claim welfare, and they're not really coming here they don't really face any danger. So I was thinking so in Hong Kong there was recent, I guess earlier on in the year as well, the Hong Kong government sort of issues this, I don't think it was entirely official, but they said that they would take themselves out of some sort of convention signed for torture claims. I don't know if you know which exact incident I'm talking about, but and correct me if I'm wrong on any facts, but I was wondering what's your point of view on that as well, because I feel Hong Kong being sort of really well developed, especially economically, it shouldn't it's sort of really sad to see them take a step back in humanitarian issues. So yeah, these are my two questions. Thank you.
Can I just clarify your first question?
Yeah, sure.
You're asking, when people reach the shores of Europe, how do we better educate and create a better image?
Is that
educate
possible?
who?
Yeah.
Sorry, who are we educating?
Oh, the refugees, how to establish themselves better, because maybe they are more I guess statistically speaking, they're also more likely to commit petty crimes or anything because also because of the situations that they're in. Is it possible at all to help them establish themselves better, to sort of increase their chances of getting accepted into the community and also change the public's perception of refugees in general?
Thanks. On that question, how to establish better? I think in the specific context of Europe, there are two countries that are considered frontline states. Italy, where a lot of boats are arriving from Libya, and Greece, where until recently a lot of boats were coming from Turkey. And UNHCR has actually been advocating very strongly that both of these countries need a lot more support. They're overwhelmed, they're bearing the brunt of hosting these new boat arrivals. They need more support. And we've, where we can, we've been trying to support them with processing refugees, registering, and also providing basic services like food and relief supplies. It's true that both of these frontline states are really quite overwhelmed, so they do need a lot more help. I would probably object to the statement that they're they're more likely to commit petty crime because,
I don't know, like,
yeah,
maybe.
that to link refugees with crime, I think,
Might be
is not
slightly
quite
unfair sometimes.
fair.
Yeah.
So I think we have to distinguish between if a refugee commits a crime
Yeah.
in a country of asylum, that refugee should not be protected, should face the same laws as anybody
Yeah.
else. No
Yeah,
question about that.
definitely, yeah. But like, is there any way to like, because like in many like, sort of like our first associations when there are like mass attacks or anything in like, especially in the European countries that receive refugees, like our reaction would probably be like, oh, that must be the refugees again. Is there any way for like, other than like educating us to help the refugees establish a better image for themselves? Like I was thinking more on lines of that.
Okay. If you're referring to the 2 recent incidents in Germany,
Yeah.
that's something that we condemn. Those acts of violence are senseless, they're terrible, and we strongly condemn those acts of violence. But it's a question of individual criminal accountability, and it's dangerous to say it happened because this person is from a certain country or this person is from has a certain asylum status. Then you risk creating fear and mistrust and suspicion against a whole community that has nothing to do with the crime. So I think when those cases happen, it's very important to distinguish between the individual act, which we strongly condemn, and the community that this person is associated with.
Okay.
On Hong Kong, I understand there was a lot of controversy,
Yeah.
at least earlier this year, on what you call fake refugees. I think it shows the need for a strong system, for a strong asylum system, or the USM system, I think that you have, for that to be beefed up so that for the criteria to be clearer, so that you can screen people in or out. If people are truly not victims of torture, they're truly not escaping conflict, then the national system should be able to screen them out.
Yeah.
But you need a strong system to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Molly, and I'm from Hong Kong Baptist University. Yes, I wonder, as you have mentioned, that there is a phenomenon of rising populism. That means there is a more anti-refugee attitude among the developed countries, especially in France, US, or Germany. Because as you've said that if we are the leaders, we can make some decisively make a better choice for the refugees. However, when we see the German president, the Merkel, and she is very determined to open more chance for the refugees, but the general public still have a very strong negative impression on the refugees. Yes, and this is what the root problem, I guess, is about the refugee problem. As you have said, the ethics paid also are undermined by the general public, their negative attitude. And your approach is to change their attitudes through propaganda. I wonder, is propaganda the best choice or more effective choice to deal with this issue? Yes, because it's quite a root problem that the people's attitude and the prejudice undermine the efforts paid by the volunteer or the passionate leaders. So I wonder what approach or what comprehensive plan would you recommend our passionate leaders, the future leaders, to do if we would like to really change the attitudes, not only by propaganda, but other effective means? Thank you.
Yikes, propaganda. Well, I hope what I say doesn't sound like propaganda. I hope it's more a matter of raising awareness, because many people don't really know what refugees go through. They don't know who refugees are. They mix them up with migrants and sometimes criminals and God knows what. So the first thing is just to clarify, okay, let them explain to people who are refugees, why are they here. They don't want to be here, they're here because they have no choice. And to really, again, show people that refugees can contribute. They often come with, useful sets of skills that they can contribute to the country that they're currently in. So where possible, we should try and raise awareness around that, about the contributions and about their needs as well. Yeah, and hopefully not have to bash the message home with a bat like propaganda. I think with understanding, people, you know, will change their minds, but it does take time. I know it's not easy. It's something we struggle with every day.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate your efforts, Pei. Thank you.
We will take the next question.
Hi, my name is Badria. I'm representing the U.S. And I guess my question is, as you previously mentioned, we see many countries like Northern Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan take in many Syrian refugees, as well as some European countries. But I've seen a certain hesitancy on the part of the U.S., especially from certain governors and senators around the U.S., openly opposing admittance of Syrian refugees into the country. So what is the cause of America's primary cause of hesitancy on admitting Syrian refugees into the country, do you think?
I didn't catch all of that.
Yeah, sorry,
Did you?
It was a little scattered. So what is the primary cause of the U.S.'s hesitancy on admitting Syrian refugees into the country?
Goodness. I'm not sure I can speak for the U.S. government here. Maybe
Sure.
some of you would be better placed to answer this. Sorry, I don't think I could say.
I have another question then maybe?
Okay.
Okay, so what is the best way to approach policymaking, I guess, in regard to refugees?
A good place to start is to come at it from a human rights perspective. Keep it humane, human rights. The U.S. is unquestionably one of the leading lights in this area. Recently, it announced that it would start, for the Central American refugees or asylum seekers, it announced protection transfer agreement. So that is a very positive step in the right direction. So in general, I think we're hoping that the U.S. will expand that there will be more regional cooperation in terms of processing and receiving refugees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can go right ahead.
Hi, Ms. Sun. I'm La from Vietnam, and I have two small questions. The first one is, can you share some information about some programs you are conducting in Vietnam, especially about what specific problems are you tackling? Who are your targets, and on what scale are you conducting your projects? And the second question is, how are you collaborating with NGOs in Vietnam? Thanks so much.
This is going to be a pretty short answer. UNHCR doesn't currently have a presence in Vietnam. We did many years ago in the context of the Indo-Chinese refugee crisis. We were here to help returnees reintegrate, to monitor their situation. But we actually closed our office in Hanoi, I think about 2 years ago, because we felt that part, the returnee reintegration part of our work was done. We do work by remote from the regional office where I'm from in Bangkok. We work mainly with the government on issues of statelessness. So stateless people, in the case of Vietnam, it could involve, possibly, I don't know for sure, some of these hill tribes or ethnic minorities in the border areas. It could involve I think Vietnamese women who married foreigners and had to renounce their citizenship, but then got divorced and came back with no citizenship. So statelessness is very much the main focus of our work with Vietnam these days. Mainly working with the ministry called Molisa. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike 3,
Hi, Miss. My name is Asad Siddiqui. I'm from Pakistan. I study in the Canadian University of Dubai, that's in the United Arab Emirates. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your speech and for bringing light to your organization, the UNHCR. First of all, I'd like to give a greeting to everyone. It's Assalamu alaikum. And if you have the good fortune of meeting any refugee from Syria or Turkey or any Muslim country, basically this is a declaration of peace. It's a greeting. It means peace be upon you. And I don't know, I just feel like in the world we live in today, I think peace would be a very nice thing, you know, as hippie as it sounds. But yeah, it's a declaration. I think they would be very happy to hear it from everyone in this room and from the countries that you're from. I think that's a bit of a small thing. And the little things do count as we're learning. I'd like to ask, and I hope you forgive me for my ignorance. I don't know anything about policies or statistics or anything. But I have a question. You mentioned something about, or you mentioned sort of a difference between developing countries and developed countries and how they take in refugees, yes? I want to know, is there a shift or is there a difference in priorities for a developed country when they take in refugees and a developing country when they take in refugees? For example, Pakistan, we do have a lot of refugees from Afghanistan, from here and there, and a lot of Syrian refugees too. Unfortunately, we don't have enough resources for our own people. We're not able to educate our own people. When refugees come in, how do we focus on them, or where should we focus our efforts on them? Whereas countries like America and European countries, when they take in refugees, should they focus on education? Should they focus on resettlement? What should they be focusing on? And is there a difference between what a developing country should be focusing on?
I think you're assuming that refugee-receiving countries can choose who comes in and who doesn't. I'm hoping that's not the case. In Pakistan, just because of sheer geography, you have many Afghan refugees and others. So it's true that, I mean, when I was talking about the disproportionate burden on developing countries of hosting refugees, millions over the years, that Pakistan was at the top of my mind. In cases like this, you know, UNHCR tries as much as possible to support the government's efforts. We've been working with the Ministry of Saffron for many years, decades, I think, to try and, you know, first to help repatriate those Afghan refugees who can go back safely, but also to try and beef up some of the refugee hosting communities, especially along the borders, in Quetta and Peshawar and elsewhere, to invest in the local services, to build hospitals, clinics, schools, and all that will service both the locals and the refugees. So, and we try and, you know, encourage donors to fund our programs there. So again, we've launched a funding appeal for the Afghan situation, which includes Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And this is something we're really pushing quite hard.
Yeah, so basically I was trying to understand that developing countries, if they had more of an action plan in terms of the situation they already have, because these situations aren't really going away anytime soon, they have to have long-term plans, right? So if they developed more concrete long-term plans in what they already have, do you think it would flatten out the situation, sort of really organize things? Again, we cannot choose who comes in.
And you cannot control, so you can have a beautiful plan, but hopefully it's flexible enough to adapt to changes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We will have the next one step up.
Hi, I'm Claire Andrews. I'm from Australia. I've heard you speak a lot about changing dialogue and changing public opinion by you know, being the voice of reason. And that's something I truly believe in and I really strive to do all the time. But I guess I feel like I'm coming up against a wall. So coming from a country where, and this might be controversial, but coming from a country where decades of ineffective and frankly inhumane public policy and sensationalism and fear-mongering and a bouncing back and forth of blame on behalf of our own government it's sort of resulted in this culture of xenophobia that's just so pervasive that it feels like being the voice of reason isn't enough and that I don't know what else I can do. I mean, it's something I still do, but I guess my question is when our government seems to ignore human rights, almost, how do I, as a citizen of that country, being under that government, how do I combat that at that level, I suppose?
You have voting rights.
Yes. Oh, well, we just had an election, and I'm not going to go into the politics of it, but we do have voting rights as to how effective that vote was. I won't go into it, but yeah.
I was just waiting for a question on Australia.
Well, yeah.
Took a while.
It was bound to come up, but
Not that I have any answers. Actually, that's a tricky situation where I think the issue has been so heavily politicized that there's two extremes and not much in the middle. And I'm glad you're trying to find that middle ground. And we need more of you. How do we try and reconcile that? I don't know. I mean, because, these are questions in my own head, where Australians are traditionally have been very receptive of refugees and diversity. But the issue that seems to get everybody edgy is the boat arrivals. You know, if you come by boat, you're jumping the queue, you're cutting the queue, you're making other people wait. There's that sense, which I don't agree with, but that seems to be a very sensitive, sore nerve for many Australians.
It's a buzzword, and that's the problem. I feel that it has become a buzzword. It's become in the recent election.
Yeah.
It just seemed to be politicized so highly, and it's become this point of contention that's so hot in our country at the moment that as soon as you say boat people, the boat people, or stop the boats, which in fact was actually a tagline for one of our political parties. When that's something that's so pervasive there, it's just so hard to combat with just being the voice of reason because it's up so high.
Maybe one area to start with is just looking at the basic rights. I mean, I hope that the one thing that everybody agrees on is that detention in these offshore processing centers is just harmful. It's harmful to people's physical health, mental health. These people are already traumatized, and you put them in detention for, 4 years or so? So that's clearly not sustainable, and it's bad. So I hope that that's something everyone agrees on, and maybe that's a starting point, to look at tackling detention and then slowly to try. Because again, I get these news clippings from Australian press, and there are often so many positive refugee stories. So I hope that the sense on the ground in communities is still quite refugee friendly. So again, we were having this discussion over lunch and wondering, the people seem to be okay with refugees, but the politics is at another level. Exactly. How do we bring it down, and how do we make sure, the politicians hear what the people are saying?
Exactly right, yeah.
Sorry, more questions.
No, that's okay. It's more of a discussion. Yeah. So thank you.